アキラは俺がゆっくりいたぶってから殺してやるから。
And then, Keisuke pulled away. It was all Akira could do to keep his knees from trembling. Despair yawned like a pit beneath him.
自分じゃ分かってないかもしれないけどさ、あんまりまともぶるなよ。だってアキラ、さっき。
Keisuke smiled fiendishly.
あんな楽しそうに殴ってたじゃないか。
Keisuke had seen him. No, Words of protest smoldered at the back of Akira's throat. He clenched his fists, struggling against the emotion triggered by Keisuke's metamorphosis, by the inescapable fact of his raw, naked malice. Keisuke gave him one last piercing look, then turned and strolled away. At this rate, Akira would lose him yet again. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to call Keisuke back. Shock turned to nausea, surging up toward his throat. He slumped against the wall, covering his mouth and closing his eyes. The world was spinning around him. Keisuke wants to kill me. Why? The questions kept looping in his head, even though no amount of thinking produced an answer.
くそ！
Akira clenched his teeth, struggling to restore some order to his thoughts. It felt like his head would explode otherwise. By the time he looked up, Keisuke had already vanished. What was he supposed to do now? Like a traveler at night without signs or stars, Akira was lost. With nowhere else to turn, Akira resumed his trek to the hotel. It was clear that something had happened to Keisuke after he'd gone missing. Those eyes, glowing with hate, were seared into Akira's memory. Keisuke had always avoided conflict. He had never even fought in Blaster, which was why Akira had been so reluctant to see him join Igura. The Keisuke who had confronted him just now bore no resemblance to Keisuke he knew. If he had been telling the truth about the club massacre, then it was all the more imperative that Akira do something. But what? No ideas were forthcoming. His original reason for going to the hotel had been to find a lead on Keisuke's whereabouts. Nothing would necessarily come of going there now. if he did nothing, though he was certain that his thoughts and feelings would crush him. He decided to let his body lead him where it would. When he stepped onto the main street, he spotted the hotel just across the road. A few people were standing around outside. He stepped forward to cross the street.
あれ？アキラ？
A high voice called his name, and brisk footsteps pattered in his direction. He turned to see a small figure running toward him.
どうしたのこんなとこで？あ、もしかして俺がホテルにいるって知って慌てて追いかけてきちゃったとか。
Brimstone was bright. He looked up at Akira, smiling from ear to ear.
ホテルにいたのか。
A vapid response slipped from his mouth. Akira was in no state to keep pace with Rin.
あれ？なんだ、知ってて来たんじゃないの？
Rin shrugged in mock disappointment. He clearly had no clue what Akira was going through.
なんてね、冗談。ってなんかすごい死にそうな顔してるけど大丈夫？
ああ、ちょっとな。
ああ、ちょっとなって。
Rin suddenly grabbed Akira's hand and held it up to his eyes.
血がついてる。もしかしてイグラでやったの？ねえ、勝った？タグ取った？
Rin leaned forward, eyes glittering, but Akira looked away with a tiny shake of his head.
いや、
とりあえずさ、俺今からホテル戻るとこだったから一緒に行こう。話聞かせてよ。元美もいるからさ。
元美も。
そうそう。ほら、クラブがえらいことになっちゃったでしょ。だからあそこたまり場にしてたやつらとか結構こっちに流れてきてるんだよね。
Rin's mention of the club disturbed him, and he had to fight to keep it from showing on his face. Come to think of it, Motomi was an information broker, or at least claimed to be. He should have a pretty good handle on what happened in Toshima, even on things that might be dismissed as a rumor.
行こう。
Rin pulled his arm, leading him toward the hotel. He took a careful look at the guys lounging along the road, but with the neutral zone close by, everybody seemed relaxed. When they entered the lobby through the broken automatic doors, the first thing Akira noticed was that the crowd did seem larger than before.
あそこ。
Following Rin's finger, he saw Motomi smoking on one of the sofas in the far right corner of the lobby. He appeared lost in thought, his expression grave, but he raised his head when he noted them approaching, and blinked upon spotting Akira.
お、アキラじゃねえか。どうした？どこで拾ってきたよ、リン。
拾ったって何よそれ。物じゃないんだからさ。たまたまあったんだよ、そこで。
ああ、クラブ潰れちまったからな。
ほんとすごかったらしいね。俺が行った時はもう片付けられた後だったけど。
Rin shrugged as he settled down into the empty sofa across from Motomi. Akira sat beside him. He couldn't blame them for being curious about the club. He'd seen it with his own eyes, and he still couldn't believe it.
アキラ、大丈夫？
ああ、
He looked up to see Rin peering at him worriedly.
なんだ、ずいぶんやつれてるな。おい、怪我までしてるのか？
いや、これは。
Scowling, Motomi took hold of his hand. His knuckles were still covered in blood.
それ、殴った時についた血でしょ？イグラのだよね。どうだったの？勝 かったの？
Motomi shot Rin an admonishing glance.
でも本当に怪我してるぞ。ちょっと切れてる。殴りすぎだ。お前さん確か武器は持ってるんだったよな。
His keen observation gave Akira a start. Back then, he had tossed his knife aside and given himself fully to the taste of fist against flesh.
途中で落とした。
A flimsy excuse, but it was the best he could do. Motomi looked surprised for a second, then shrugged his shoulders.
たまにはそういうこともあるだろ。どれ、一応見といてやろう。あれ？お前さん、バッグ持ってなかったか？前に豚で交換した衝動ケーキだのなんだのって、どうしたよ？
捨てた。
あ？捨てた？
The dean of the lobby swallowed Motomi's yelp. He put a hand to his forehead and heaved an enormous sigh.
お前バッたくいつでもどこでも手に入りますってわけじゃないんだぞ。まあいいや、しゃあない。おいリー。
Rin rose from the sofa, pouting.
いいだろ、お前豚タコ腐るほどあるじゃないか。
数には限りがあるんだよ。
Rin pulled a face and stuck his tongue out, then dashed off toward the back of the lobby.
かわいくね。
Letting out a smoky breath, Motomi rumpled his hair while sinking to the backrest. Akira too leaned back and lowered his eyes to his feet. Gazing up at the ceiling, Motomi sighed, as though to distract himself from the awkward silence. He appeared to be thinking about something, his fingertips beat an irregular rhythm on the armrest.
ケイスケのことなんだが。
Akira ultimately looked up.
何か分かったか？もしくは会えたとか。
That wasn't Keisuke, Akira wanted to say. Instead, he shook his head.
そうか。俺の方でもいろいろと当たってみてるんだが、それらしい話を聞くには聞くんだが、なんか妙なんだよな。
妙？
ああ、青いつなぎってのと体格はだいたい合ってるんだが、まあ俺もお前さんたちをよく知ってるわけじゃないから何とも言えないんだが。
Akira understood his confusion all too well. Whatever rumors Motomi was hearing would likely be impossible to connect with the Keisuke he had met.
それに見かけたって話は聞くが、足取りがつかめない。出所を探ってっても途中で幻みたいにあやふやになっちまうんだ。どうなってんだかな。
If even Motomi's network was useless, maybe Keisuke was deliberately trying to mislead people about where he was going. The current Keisuke seemed capable of that.
とにかく死んじゃいないってことだ。よかったな。俺ももう少し探ってみるから、お前さんも諦めなさんな。
Akira looked away guiltily. A small nod was the only repose he could manage. It felt like he was deceiving Motomi.
しかし、いよいよおかしくなってきたな、この街も。クラブのあれといい、他にもイグラとは無関係の殺しが起きてるらしい。
イグラと無関係の？
なあ、要するにタグが取られてないってことだ。 まあ、そりゃこんだけ治安の悪い町だからな。殺しはイグラだけってわけじゃない。けどな、ここんとこ、毎晩2、3人は殺されてるらしい。しかも、犯人の目撃情報が全くない。
Was it Keisuke? Akira hated himself for the thought. Grinning the reminder of his cigarette beneath his heel, Motomi exhaled a smoky sigh.
町の連中がすっかり怯えちまってる。もともと自分以外は全て敵みたいなところだからな。疑心暗鬼になって暴れ出すやつも出てきてる。なんつうか不穏だな。不穏。平和だったってわけでもないんだけどな。まあ最近入ってくる話っつったらそんなのばっかりだ。
Akira wasn't listening. It's not him. It's not him. But no matter how many times he repeated the words in his head, he did nothing to silence his growing doubts. I'll torture you nice and slow before I kill you. His throat closed up. He could still hear the voice, hot in his ears.
おい、お前本当に顔色悪いぞ。大丈夫か？
Motomi started to rise, his expressions fair. But just then, Rin returned, arms laden with medical supplies and water bottles.
お待たせ。ほいっと。
After setting the supplies on the sofa beside Akira, he looked back and forth between Motomi and Akira.
どうしたの？
わざわざすまなかったな。
だったら自分が言ってよね。もう。
After placating, Rin with his usual easy smile, Motomi finished standing up and moved to sit next to Akira, avoiding the pile of supplies. He cleansed Akira's cuts with water, applied disinfectant and slapped on the bandage, all with consummate speed and skill.
そういや、前に手当てしてやった傷、腕だったか。あっちはどうした？
ああ、
He completely forgot.
忘れてたか。忘れるってことは大丈夫ってことだな。よし、俺だ。気になるようなら後で剥がせよ。
悪い。
気にするね。
Motomi winked at him, then stuck a fresh cigarette in his mouth. Though the mood had eased up at last, Rin still glanced between them, his expression clouded.
おっさん、
ん？
あのことはアキラに言ったの？
ああ、ケイスケだろ。今お前さんが交換しに行ってる間に話したよ。
そっか。
Rin crouched next to Akira's sofa and looked up at him intently.
アキラさ、ちゃんとなんか食べてる？フラフラの行動不能になっちゃったら、ケイスケとかイグラどころじゃないじゃん。なんか、アキラってそういうのどうでもよさそうだよね。
It was true that Akira had never paid much attention to eating. On top of that, his present situation made it hard to work up an appetite. The last time he'd eaten was... he couldn't remember. Even though it could have been that long ago.
おっさん、今ソリド持ってる？
いや、俺はあれは嫌いなんだよ。いかにも合成して作りましたって味がすかん。何もない時は我慢して食うけどな。
おっさんの好みはいいから。俺も今切らしちゃったんだよね。
Rin considered this for a moment, then suddenly sprang to his feet.
よし、決めた！交換してくる！
だってここじゃやってねえだろ。こっから一番近いとこだと確か南の。
Akira looked over at the cloakroom. He felt like Rin had traded for solids there once before. Looking more closely, though, he saw a piece of paper tacked to the wall. No solids. Perhaps the influx of customers from the club had drained their supply.
南まで行ってくる。
おいおい。
自分の分も切らしちゃってるからさ。どうせ買いに行くつもりだったし。
Rin walked a few steps toward the door, then looked over his shoulder.
アキラ、待っててよ。
With a jaunty wave of his hand, he vanished onto the street.
騒がしったらありゃしねえ。言い出したら聞かねえんだよ。特艦小僧だよ、ほんと。
Motomi exhaled a cloud of white smoke.
余計疲れちまったんじゃないのか。少し眠ったらどうだ。
いや、大丈夫。
Rin was only running around like this because he was worried about Akira. Better than that, a Rin who was sullen and sad.
別に詮索しようとは思うんだな。あまり溜め込むのは良くないぞ。
Motomi spoke in a soft drawl, his eyes following the smoke toward the ceiling. This was Motomi's way of saying that he'd seen through all of Akira's evasions, but was choosing not to press the matter all the same. Whether this was kindness or its opposite, Akira couldn't tell.
あ
Akira nodded and hauled himself to his feet.
どこへ行く？
リンが戻ってくるまで外の空気を吸ってくる。
中立地帯周辺だからって油断するなよ。
ああ。
He left the bustling lobby and went outside. Slipping into the first alleyway he saw, he leaned against the wall by the entrance and sighed. The cold night air soothed him as it seeped into his lungs. He was grateful for Rin and Motomi's concern, but right now, he just wanted to be alone. Should he tell them about Keisuke? What would happen if they encountered Keisuke in his current state? If they learned that the killer roaming the city was someone they knew? Was there any chance that might end without blood? Though he had gone outside hoping to clear his head, the chilly silence was instead having the opposite effect entirely. As Akira sighed and shifted away from the wall, something caught his eye. It was a ghostly white figure, rising from the darkness at the end of the alley. Akira froze. He was headed his way. As he drew closer, he saw what it was. A young man, crawling on his hands and knees. His body was encased in some kind of glossy material, and the exposed parts of his skin were terribly pale. The sight, bizarre even in this degenerate city, made Akira's blood run cold. He steeled himself to run, but then he remembered where he had seen this creature before. The executioners. This was their dog. The dog stopped a few paces away and sat down on his haunches with both hands in front of him, just as a real dog would. Instead of a gag, his mouth held a white envelope. Did he want Akira to take it? As if he had perceived what Akira was thinking, the dog beckoned with his chin. Akira reached for the letter with trembling fingers. The next moment, the dog tossed the letter aside with a shake of his head, then threw himself on Akira. Akira's confusion made him slow to react. Before he knew it, the dog had knocked him to the ground and pinned his shoulders with a strength that was surprising or his gaunt physique. His panting tongue dribble drew on Akira's face. Just like a real dog at play, the boy in the leather sniffed Akira's neck, then ran his wet tongue over Akira's cheeks, lips, and even his nose.
やめろ
Viscerally repulsed, he shoved the dog's head away. As he did, his fingers pressed into the blindfold. He expected the creature to rear back, howling. Instead, there was a moment of intense vertigo as his fingers met no resistance at all. The sockets were empty. Someone had removed his eyeballs. Akira shoved the dog away and leapt to his feet. He assumed a low stance with his hand on his knife. Meanwhile, the dog had retreated to a short distance. He watched Akira, licking his chops as though savoring Akira's reaction. He then turned and loped deeper into the alley, quickly vanishing from the sight. Akira could hear his heart racing as he gazed into the darkness that had swallowed the creature. The chilling sensation of those empty eye sockets still lingered in his fingertips. He doubted he would ever understand arbitrostasis. The wet envelope lay abandoned on the road. He picked it up and turned it over. There was no address. The instant he unsealed it, his nose tingled with the rich smell of rose perfume. It contained a single card. How fare your fortunes in battle? I hope you all pardon the sudden invitation, but I would simply love to have you for dinner. If you could but find it in your heart to grant me a few moments your precious time, we shall discuss matters such as the friend who accompanied you. Feel free to call on me whenever you please. Do come along. However, I wait you eagerly. Arbitro. The penmanship was delicate and rather feminine. One phrase stood out from the rest. The friend who accompanied you. Akira had very few acquaintances in the city, and it didn't feel right to call Rin and Motomi his friends. It had to be Keisuke. Arbitro had seen Akira and Keisuke together at the palace twice. He might easily have made the connection. But even then, what could he know about Keisuke? What could possibly merit an invitation like this? This could be a trap. He didn't know why Arbitro would set a trap for him, for all people, but the invitation was too strange to be anything else. Or was it related to Keisuke's recent activities? What they may have mentioned, indiscriminate killings, ones with no connection to Igura. Those weren't necessarily Keisuke's work, but perhaps Arbitro, who ran Igura, had learned something that made him suspect Akira's friend. Could that be the reason for his summons? It was pointless to wonder. The only way to know was to accept the invitation. It seemed more than likely a trap, but at present, he had no other leads. As long as there was a chance this meeting could be fruitful, perhaps the risk was worth it. He thrust the letter in his jacket pocket, then looked toward the hotel. Rin and Motomi would want to know why he was going to the palace. They might try to stop him. He turned away and started walking, doing his best to ignore the pricking of his conscience. Malice filled the streets like an invisible miasma. It was always there, but at night, in the dark, it seemed to cling to your skin. Akira hastened toward the palace, sticking close to buildings and taking care not to get drawn down any dark alleys along the way. He had no intention of sitting down for a leisurely meal. All he wanted was to know where Betrothed had summoned him. Reaching a major intersection, he came to a sudden stop. The cramped coffee shop where he had first taken refuge in Toshima stood silently along the road leading south. That was where Keisuke had found him. Back then, he could not have imagined what the future had in store. His vision of the future had been simple indeed. Fight an igra, defeat Ilray, clear his name, and maybe, somewhere along the way, learn how it felt to kill or to die. But now, this was foolish. Sentimentally, didn't suit him. He sighed to clear his head. It was time to move. Sensing someone behind him, he tried to turn, but something slammed into the back of his neck. The world closed in around him. His body crumpled, but he felt his assailant catch him before he fell. He fought desperately to lift his head and find out who it was, but his eyelids dropped shut like steel curtains. His mind sank into darkness. He woke to a splitting headache. It was a nasty awakening, like being dragged from a deep sleep against his will. His head felt stuffed with cotton. The scenery glimpse through his narrow vision was familiar. The coffee shop.
お目覚めかお姫様
The voice was like a bucket of ice water to the face.
ずいぶんうなされてたな。悪い夢でも見てたのか
Keisuke was facing him, the corners of his mouth curved up in a grin. Akira started to get up, but Keisuke shoved him back to the floor.
まだ辛いだろう。寝てろよ。たまにはさ、ゆっくり話でもしようよ。
Akira grimaced. Keisuke had the scent of blood about him.
そんなに睨むなよ。なんで俺がここにいると思う？アキラ、わかるか？
His tone was eager, like a child who knew something his parents did not. Akira was in no state to answer, or even to process the question. It was all he could do to keep his emotions from spiraling out of control.
匂いだよ。アキラの匂い。
Keisuke closed his eyes and gave a soft sniff.
いい匂いがするんだ。シャンプーとか石鹸とかとは違った。もっといい匂い。
His sing-song voice sent a chill down Akira's spine.
なあ、せっかくだから何か話せよ。俺が先に話そうか。俺の英雄譚とか聞きたい。結構殺したんだよ。
Akira stared at him in disbelief.
お前がやったのか。何が？
Keisuke smiled, pleased to have gotten a response.
最近イグラと無関係に人が殺されてるって聞いた。お前なのか？